there's no wrong decision about when you join a company. It's really a matter of personal preference. The building stage, the most interesting and the most, I think, vulnerable business stage is scaling up after the initial investment and making the right decisions so that the first few years where you really scale up matter and set the base for the future.
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. 20-Minute Leaders is a proud supporter of Make-A-Wish Israel and Tech to Peace, and is in proud collaboration with Secret Chord Ventures, J Ventures, Riverside FM, Fusion VC, Birthright Excel, J Impact, Leap, Google for Startups, and Hippo, and in media partnership with CTech. Hello and welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Today I have the pleasure and honor of speaking with Amos Arev, the Executive Vice President of Engineering and General Manager at Capitolis. Amos is a highly experienced engineering executive who has been at the forefront of technology innovation for decades. Prior to joining Capitolis, he served as the Vice President of Research and Development at LogGeeks, a company focused on AI in the legal industry. With more than 20 years of expertise, he brings deep expertise in data, engineering, research and development, and technology, spearheading these efforts at leading technology and data companies such as Global E, Hexateer, Siren, and Skybox Security. Amos holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in Electrical and Electronic Engineering from the Technion Israel Institute of Technology, and a Master of Science degree in Electrical and Electronic Engineering from Tel Aviv University. Such an awesome episode. I hope you enjoy. I can only imagine how busy you are, so really thank you for taking the time. Amos, I don't even know how to start listing off the incredible things you've done. Today, you're Executive Vice President of Engineering and GM of Israel of Capitolis, but starting all the way from Converse in the 90s to then Checkpoint as R&D Group Manager, Skybox Security, Vice President in Research and Development, Siren as Vice President of Research. The list goes on and on and on and on. You're obviously really a phenomenal technology leader, and that's exactly what I want to talk to you about today. What does it mean to be a technology leader, to lead research and development across a variety of organizations in different sectors, and really, why do you enjoy it so much? Because only somebody who enjoys it so much can do it the way that you're doing it. So again, Amos, thank you very much for being here.
So let me start from the last decade or so, where I've been joining companies post-round A and taking them from the POC stage where they got the initial large investments after having proven the idea, and then taking them to scale. And I think this is the most interesting part of being a technology leader, bringing to the table your capabilities as a leader, with all of what you know how to do as an engineer, but really being part of the executive team and shaping the company, and getting to have control of how the company shapes up, what it is that we do with the first customers, how technology comes into play, but not necessarily just doing technology. And eventually, each time again, starting from a very small team, that wrote the POC, and then getting it to a larger team that you shape and find the key players for and get them to have the culture and eventually scale with them, where most of what you do is just make sure that everything is going in the right direction, but not really managing the detail.
Interesting.
And that's what I enjoy. The kick I get is from starting all over again with a small team. In later years, I've moved away from security, and I'm always looking for companies that are disruptors in the field that they're in, that have a very new idea of something that has always been done differently.
Right. I mean, you're looking at legal, and now you're looking at capital markets. So obviously, quite big shift. But I want to, you're mentioning these companies have raised Series A. A lot of companies raised Series A, especially in the last decade. So you kind of have a difficult choice ahead of you, right? Every 3 years or so, as you're transitioning between these companies, making that big impact, you have to decide yourself. which company you're betting on, which team you're looking to join. So what goes into the decision-making process for Amos over these last 20 years as to how are you choosing which team to spend your time with?
It has to be an innovative team that is very thoughtful of what they're doing, that thought through all of the details of what they're trying to solve for. It has to be a team of veterans who already have seen failures in the past and survived them and learned from them. It has to be a closely knit team that is not just a bunch of individuals, but everyone tells the same story. It has to have a very good lineup of investors who are deeply involved in what we're doing. And this is all part of the decision-making, both for the team that's considering me and for me considering the team.
Interesting. It almost sounds like a very, very good investment strategy, what you're outlining here. And kind of your time is probably the most important investment you can make, right?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think that every time I join a company, it's not for the purpose of leaving after 3 years. I was joined for the long term. This is the only way, I think, to look at joining any team that you spend most of your time in. And yes, definitely like an investment decision.
So go back a little bit to sort of this underlying pattern of joining a team that successfully built an interesting POC, is ready to now scale this. You found that this is sort of your sweet spot. What is it about this process that excites you so much? Because you could be leading, you could join a company as VP R&D that is much larger, leading hundreds of people in a mature phase. Very different type of work. What is it about sort of the scaling nature that really gets you excited? It sounds also you're highly involved with the executive team with sort of these strategic decision-making processes.
I think there's no wrong decision about when you join a company. It's really a matter of personal preference. The building stage, the most interesting and the most, I think, vulnerable business stage is scaling up after the initial investment and making the right decisions so that the first few years where you really scale up matter and set the base for the future. That's a high-stake game. So you need to be all in. You need to really, really understand the business case and all the details. And what's more interesting for me is every time I enter a company where there's a new domain, it's yet another challenge to learn. And specifically in Capitolis, where I don't even know how to balance my own checkbook, which was my first answer to Gil when he called me.
Amazing.
And by the way, I'll leave his answer for your next question. I think it's about understanding what makes that team tick and how you really set the foundation. And since the stakes are high, it's really more interesting to me. I know there's a lot of interest in people, my friends who are leading larger teams. It's a whole new profession, whole different profession than the profession that I'm holding. I feel that this is my sweet spot.
It requires a lot of energy from your end because you have to. You're basically an entrepreneur yourself, right? You're an entrepreneur. You're a technology entrepreneur that is partnering with other entrepreneurs at some point along their journey and making a big impact. So I guess that also requires quite a bit of energy from your end as well.
Yeah, and it also requires you to change the energy that you invest. So initially, when you join a small team, you kind of do everything. You call the candidates. You do all the interviews. You make sure that the kitchen is stocked correctly with all the things that people are looking for. And eventually the team grows. Then you look at how the team scales and the leaders. And if you get them from the inside, should you look for people who are outside? How do you scale the technology? So in a very short span of time, you get to do a lot of different things in the mission of the company. So it's part entrepreneurial, but it's not from the initial stage of thinking of the original idea. It gives you the opportunity to look at the idea and enter the scene when there's kind of a proof that it works.
Sure.
And then take to the next stage.
Sure. And I mean, I think that at the end, there's a few phases, obviously, to startups. One phase is, being the visionary okay, we have this great market, great opportunity, this blue ocean that we're about to tackle. And then there's, okay, let's create sort of this technological POC to show a validation. But then you come in and say, okay, is this actually have room to be a stable technology that will persist long-term, way beyond the POC? And that's sort of where you come in. And that has to get validated just as the idea needs to get validated. It's just a different sort of validation, right?
Yeah.
Incredible. Tell me a little bit about Capitolis, capital markets. What got you into, what got hooked onto this company almost 3 years ago?
So Capitolis is trying to solve inefficiencies in the capital market. When you look at the way regulators work, specifically since 2008, it's both a good thing since more regulation actually makes the banking system safer, but it also limits the capacity of how banks can operate because eventually it puts a limit on collateral that's being put against risks that are being taken.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is a real issue because eventually it affects everything. It affects the price of services vended by the banks. It can be services vended to other banks or other financial institutions, but it can also be to the person buying a pension fund. And eventually this needs to be solved in a way that is a very clear and very clean, but also very efficient. And we do this in two ways. One is we look at the portfolio that each of the banks have of future investments in foreign exchange. And then we offer ways in which banks can change their way the portfolio is set up so that it's more efficient and less collateral should be put against it. And this is a networking game because each of these portfolios actually portrays connections between the banks and other banks that are involved. In addition, we also look for other inefficiencies where we need to connect institutions that are liquid and looking for investments with institutions that need this liquidity in order to work outside of their own books. In which case, we actually help the banks be more of a platform when they can operate their own financial structures. And we get the investment in, by which we also free them of the need to have the money invested written off their books. Both of these games are networking games. They involve a lot of interaction with the players. It's not a game of a lot of players, but it's a very involved one. My interest in this was that it is very interesting for me to find out how technology comes into play into this, because it's not a large-scale operation. It's a very delicate, lot of detail operation. And it's also, you don't actually find out what the product is until you're actually deeply involved in actually running the product. So you need to start playing with the players. You need to understand what they need. And then the need changes. And then technology needs to keep up with this in a way that eventually you actually develop a scalable platform, which is a really, really hard puzzle to solve.
Interesting. So you have
yeah.
You have to continuously evolve with this. Now you mentioned that when you first spoke to Gil, it was a kind of a foreign world to you.
Yeah, it was. And I asked him, why me?
Okay.
And he said, I have a lot of bankers who are very proficient at what they do, but I need a technologist to join the team where technology is the main thing and it's not about banking. And initially, when I joined the company, it was such a vast lack of knowledge that I spent a lot of my time talking to the people who are experienced in banking, just finding out what it is that makes this business stick. Until eventually Gil told me that I'm never going to be able to play in the field, and this is not actually the game I should be playing. I need to be good at what I'm doing and understand enough for me to make sure that what I hear makes sense, and it's enough for me to understand what technology needs to be created. And this dropped a penny for me because my role in this team is to really bring to the table my strategic views on what I should be doing, or my team should be doing in order to be able to scale and also play the game, which is ever changing, and be able to take part in making strategic decisions about the company without needing to be the expert in banking.
Interesting. Wow. So looking back at, and was this sort of a similar experience to what you had in legal and previously in cyber? Or is this like a pattern as you transition into new markets that you're able to balance the technology execution and strength in balance with your understanding of the market and sort of the complexity of the idea? Because all the companies that you've worked with, they've all been provided very complicated theses around the market that they're in. It's not a simple product to understand by no means.
Yes, but I think if you look at security, and this is a very personal way of looking at it, but I think that when you look at security, usually you have a good idea of what you want to achieve. You create a product that you need to educate the market to use. And eventually technology drives the game. And you're constantly thinking about the next step where the market isn't even thinking about it. In contrast, when you look at what we do at Capitolis, technology needs to be the game changer, but it by no means drives the game. The game is played by rules of the banking system, and you need to be novel in the way you play with these rules and introduce technology into it to make this a scalable, very good solution. So it's very, very different. And I was used to always being ahead of the pack by understanding technology and running the product and having the next step ahead and talking to customers and just educating them on the great new ideas that we had. In this industry, there's part of it is that, but it's not the technology novelty that's driving it. It's a combination of the financial structuring novelty,
the multidisciplinary nature of it,
backed by technology that actually makes them scale. So it's
interesting. So transitioning a little bit to, and obviously I know that you're very, very humble and modest, so it'll be hard for me to get this out of you, but if you're looking at technology leadership and what's worked for you and what makes you a successful VP R&D across the different organizations that you've been with, and it sounds that the way that you're speaking about your experiences, it resonates a lot with a very mature understanding and a lot of past experiences, even just the way that you're describing what you're looking for in a company that you're joining, whether it's sort of this veteran team that has gone through challenges and overcame them or survived them, and the involvement of the investors. So sort of what makes you a successful technology leader in the day-to-day? If you think about sort of these groups that you're building from the ground up, what makes you successful there?
I think if I need to narrow it down to one thing, it's being able to identify the correct people and build a good team that scales.
And is that generalized across the different organizations the same way, or do different people fit better into different organizations from your perspective?
There are commonalities. I think that a good team is a team that is mainly built from people who are critical thinkers and actually understand that whatever is stopping him is just them. There's no ceiling. And my part in this is finding out how the team should be constructed and what parts the people in the team should be playing. And eventually a culture is created that is different between teams, because I think the business affects the people who like to be part of this business. And eventually there's a different culture to each. But I think the common thing between all of the teams, the successful teams that I've been fortunate enough to build, is that eventually my role is just navigating. And people do their own thing. And eventually within this chaos, I'm able to just read the big picture and be able to help them navigate through whatever it is that they're doing. And this is scale, eventually. My idea of success is that.
I love that.
It's
So
not, it's not about technology. It's not about, yeah, I'm involved in architecture. Yeah, I have my say in what tools we should be choosing, but these are just pet products. It's really the people.
I love it. So your KPI is how do I make myself a little bit less relevant in different areas where this family that I'm building, this organization that I'm building from the ground up, both culturally, professionally, socially, sort of operates as a functional unit that is able to be self-sustaining. And I love that. I just love that that mindset. And honestly, Amos, I have to say that I've been doing this for a long time. This podcast, I've spoken to over 900 people, and you're the true authentic way of being and how you enjoy what you do and how intentionally you are about why you're doing this and why you're joining these companies and how much fulfillment you get from building these great teams and watching them scale. That intentionality is very inspiring. So I really want to thank you for that, as well as for the time. I know you're very busy. So again, thank you for joining me here, and I highly appreciate it. Best of luck with Capitolis and everything else.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.